Okay, let's get into it. So, hello everyone. My name is Nathan. I am a coordinator on our Educate team at QMind, and today we will be discussing just some introductory to Python concepts. So, if you want to follow along with me in the workbook, which is very highly encouraged, I am on page 46. If you just have a PDF downloaded, I'm the first workshop in the workshop section. And at any point in time, you can feel free to put any questions in the chat or turn your mic on. And let's get started. So by the end of today's workshop, we're going to have three primary goals. The first one is we're going to install Python on everyone's computer, or at least make sure that you feel comfortable doing that on your own time. The second one is knowing how to create and use Jupyter Notebooks, which are a great tool that we often use in data science and machine learning. And the third one is just be able to write some basic Python code. So let's get into it. Okay, that's just what I went over. Okay, so what is Python? So I'm sure most of you know that Python is a programming language. It's high level, which means that the code you write is very similar to English. You have a lot of functions and things in Python that do the high level abstraction for you. So you just have to tell it what to do, and it does a lot of things behind the scenes for you, which is a great advantage of Python if people have programmed in other languages like Java and C before. It's very, very, very common for AI, machine learning, data science. And in the workforce these days, Python is like a very high demand skill. It can also be used for things like web development, creating apps. It's very versatile. There's a lot of really good tools that come with Python. It's pretty easy to learn and to use because, like I said, the syntax is pretty similar to English. So it's lends itself nicely to like a beginner programming language. And so the way we run Python is we can use something called an IDE, an integrated development environment, or Jupyter Notebooks. You could also use like online compilers, but that's like really not recommended. Personally, I prefer to use IDEs. Jupyter Notebooks are great for sharing and collaborating on code, as we'll see shortly, but an IDE is usually great because it has lots of good debugging tools, and it lets you really just get into your code and like see what's going on. Okay. So now what I want us to do is, for anyone who doesn't have Python installed, if you do, actually, can I get some people in the chat if they have Python installed? Because if a lot of people have it installed, we can skip over this. However, if people don't, people have it. Yeah, you have it installed. Okay, you guys are ahead of the game. Perfect. Okay, so in that case, we can skip over this section. In the workbook, you'll see, for anyone who doesn't have it installed, there is a link there that you just click on it, you push install. It's pretty simple. And the way you can verify your installation was a success by just going into your terminal and typing Python -- version. So I would recommend doing that. Doesn't matter what version. No, I typically prefer Python 3. As do I think is the standard these days. So if you have if you're on a Mac or Linux system, you probably have Python pre-installed. It might be Python 2.7. That's typically what you get right out of the box. So if you do have that, I would still recommend getting the newer Python, which is like 3.9 point something potentially. So I would double check your version in terminal. And then go from there. Yeah. Okay, so let's get. Okay, so next we'll talk about Jupyter Notebooks. So Jupyter Notebooks are a web-based app, and they were created for the purpose of combining text, which is called Markdown, and code. And the reason we do this is because we can leave comments that are more detailed than just like programming comments. We can like actually write, we can write descriptions, we can put images, links. So it lends itself very nicely to any kind of data science project because you can have your code and then you can be explaining what your code does just above or just below your code. So they're really fantastic tools. And the preferred method, or at least my preferred method, and how we're going to make sure that we have them installed, is we can use Anaconda. So Anaconda and Conda are two things that come installed together. Lots of times people get them a little bit confused, but what they are is Anaconda is a distribution of libraries. So that's kind of like when you install Anaconda, it gives you access to a bunch of different Python libraries, some of them which you will see very soon, like NumPy and Pandas, and some that like you may not use as often. And then Conda is a package manager. So what that allows you to do is go into your terminal and say Conda install and then the name of a package, and that will pull the code from the internet for you and make sure you have it running in your on your machine so that when you want to access these libraries, you can. So has anyone used Conda or Anaconda before? Just so I have an idea. A tiny bit. Okay, cool. Okay, so we can get into okay, so in the workbook on the third page of this specific workshop, there's a link there to the Anaconda website. I can just actually go through it right now. Why not? So if we click on that link there, we will go to, oops. Can you guys still see my screen? Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get into the technical details and start learning something cool. So, quantum computing.
Sorry guys, bear with me here. There we go. Okay, so if you follow that link in the workbook, you can go here to this Anaconda homepage. You just hit download. It should already populate whatever your system is right here. You can see mine says Mac OS Python 3.8. That's good if you're on Mac. If you're on Windows, there should be something here. So if everyone wants to do that right now, that would be fantastic. And if anyone has questions doing that, put them in the chat, or I think you can request mic access if you want to do that as well. But based on the rest of the things we're going to do today, you should download it. So if you just hit download, and then you should get your package downloading. And then once you have it downloaded, it's just going to be like a pretty basic install. You should just be able to open it, follow the steps, and that should be all. Let me just go through it right now with you guys and see if there's any specific settings. But once we have that up and running, we can check the same way we would check Python. So you can say Anaconda-B in your terminal, and that should tell me the version I'm running. Maybe not. Yeah, so there we can see my Conda. I don't know why the Anaconda one didn't open. Oh no, it did. There we go. See version 1.8. So once you have it installed, verify it in your terminal. And if people want to just put in the chat when they have installed, so I know I can move on, because it will help us go to the next thing I want to do, which is the Jupyter Notebooks. And you should also install them. Okay, fantastic. There also should be, I'm not going to reinstall again because I already have it installed, but you should be able to, there should be like some kind of this thing here. You should install this too if you go to the option Anaconda Navigator. Let's see if mine opens. It's basically like a GUI for your desktop that allows you to access different things, like different packages and libraries in the distribution, which is very helpful. My preference is command line to access things, but this is also good. So you can see once you have Anaconda installed, I have like these options for Jupyter Notebook here, which is what we're gonna be using primarily all throughout Camp Keymind, and like once you start your design team projects as well. So once you get that, you can either launch Jupyter Notebook from here, or we can do it through the terminal. And in the terminal, you just type Jupyter Notebook. So once everyone gets that, let me know and we'll move on. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions about like really anything related to Python that we can answer while this is being installed? I think it should. Let me go through the installation process. I think it should get installed the Navigator should get installed with Anaconda. Let's see, continue. Yeah, I believe so. I don't hear if we push customize here. Yeah, I think it should just come. You know what? Let me double check that. If anyone has done the installation and you have Navigator and you want to answer that question in the chat, that'd be great. I'm pretty sure it installs directly with. I just can't check since I already have it installed. Yeah, it does. Okay, thank you very much, whoever answered that question. Yeah, so once we get that up and running, you will have two options to run your Jupyter notebooks. And if anyone does have some Python programming experience, what we'll go through might be repetitive for you, which is okay, but it'll just be a good refresher on some like basic syntax. And yeah, so just bear with me if you have some experience, and if you don't have experience, then we're basically just going to go over the basics. Should we launch Jupyter Notebook? Yeah, if you want to, go for it. What I was going to do is have you guys run the Jupyter Notebook that I have prepared. So there's going to be two ways to do that. The first one is if you go to the workbook, the first page, there's just like a little tent icon. If you click it, that will bring you to the this is the Jupyter Notebook that I have for today. In GitHub, we can't run it live. So like this code can't be edited or run. It's just like static here. So there's instructions in the main here of how we can run these on our own machines. So if you follow these steps here, it's pretty simple. I'll actually go through it right now. You guys will get into some Git stuff. I think the next workshop is Git, so you will get into this more. But essentially what you want to do is say fork, push this button here, and then now you have your own version of this repository. This is called a repository, and it has all the files you'll need for all of the workshops today. And then you can say, you can push here and click clone, and then just copy this. And then in your terminal, all you have to do from there is type git clone and paste what you just copied, like Control V, and then it'll clone into wherever you just clone that into. So now, once that's done, you can say it takes like 5 seconds. You can say cd. So that CD, where do I find my terminal? Okay, good question. Sorry, I should have went over that. If you're on Mac, you can Spotlight search, so just say terminal. If you are on Windows, you should also be able to search for it. But I don't know what the Windows terminal is called. Windows. Anyone on Windows who knows that and wants to jump in on that question, that would be cool. It might be called console. Command prompt. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you for whoever got it. Sweet. So yeah, in your terminal, on same thing, I'm on like Mac/Unix, so my commands will be a bit different, but I'll get the Windows ones. So on Mac, you'd say cd, which is current directory, and then now that I've cloned my Camp QMind folder, I can say Camp QMind 2021. And now I'm in this Camp QMind folder. And then from here, if I type Jupyter Notebook, then it will open a Jupyter Notebook in that folder. So we'll see that in a second. And then now we have all the folders that we had in the GitHub, and now you can navigate to whichever one you want. So coding, and this one is Intro to Python. So that's how you're going to be expected to access the Jupyter Notebooks for the rest of the workshops. However, considering this is the first one, and I don't want to get too much into the Git stuff, if anyone can't figure it out, I will share with you this link, which is, I did this on Google Collaboratory, which is another just like platform for running Jupyter Notebooks. And because it's Google, it's great. You can always share it. I highly recommend using this one if you have the choice. I like it a lot better than the actual like Jupyter Notebook server. So if I just copy the link and paste it into the chat here, you guys will all be able to access that if you prefer to do it that way. And once you have that, if you make any edits to it, you can like save your own copy and mess around with it, which I also encourage you to do once I go through it. Okay, with that being said, I know I just talked for like 10 minutes straight. How's everyone doing with like Anaconda, Jupyter Notebook, that whole process? Does anyone have questions that I can answer or like problems we can help solve before I get into the next part? You can also launch straight from here if you just push launch. That's definitely the way easier way of doing it. But you see it just ends up running whatever commands in your terminal. And then it launches your Jupyter Notebook. So you can see this is my entire directory. So I think here's Camp Q9. I just put it right in my home directory, and then you can navigate to the same thing. But I think it's also in my desktop, because I'm pretty sure I did this already. Yeah, so this is also the Camp Q9 directory, and you can access any of the files and all. Okay, so any questions about that whole process that we just went through? I know that was a lot of information to take in like 10 minutes. And if not, then I will go to the Jupyter Notebook. And I will also add, okay, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll go through the GitHub process one more time. I know I kind of did it fast, so I'm gonna do it again slower. And yeah, and if not, then you can just use the link I sent. And I'm pretty sure the very next workshop is an intro to Git, and I believe Sean will be going over that in more detail. So in the, if you go in the workbook and you click the little like tent icon, it will bring you to the GitHub. Or if you, I think it's in the Slack channel, there should be a link as well. So if you go here and you say, you have to fork this repository to make it kind of your own. And then once you do that, so if I do fork, now I have it in my account. Oh, I should say you need a GitHub account to do this. That's a really important piece that I did not say. If you don't have a GitHub account, don't worry about it for now. Just use the link I sent you in the chat. And I'm sure you'll be making one at some point today, if not right after this workshop. So if you happen to not have an account, if you do, that's great. You can fork it. But if you're not signed in, then it's going to make you go through that whole process. And like, you don't have to do that now. So if you do have an account and you have forked it, this is what's called cloning. So we're basically taking an online repository, which is this like file structure or directory here, and we're putting it onto our local like machine so we can then edit the files. So if you just hit copy right here, it'll copy it. And then in terminal, all you have to do is say git clone and then paste that, and that's all you need to do to get the directory onto your local machine. If you are on Windows, I believe the process should be the exact same. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but okay, so if you don't have an account, yeah, it's the exact same on Windows. Okay, if you don't have an account, click that link that I just sent in the chat, and it will, like if I click it right now, you guys can see that. This is the results of the link that I clicked. I mean, this is my account and I created it so I can edit straight in here. But if you go in here and edit anything, then you guys should see an option to like save a copy, or it'll tell you like you don't have permissions to edit this file. But for now, you can just follow along with what I'm doing. So that might be the easier move if people are struggling to get the GitHub solution working, and you will get into that more. Yes, you can do. You guys will have like save a copy in Drive, or like save as an option if you open this link. Okay, how are we feeling about all that? Am I good to get into this notebook? Do you know how to add GitHub to the command on Windows? You should also just be able to git clone on Windows. I don't think it's any different. Yeah, you have just the same git clone command on Windows. So try that, and if it doesn't work, then just use the Google solution, and next workshop, ask Sean about troubleshooting that. I just don't want to spend too much time on the Git stuff because then we won't have time to go through the entire Jupyter notebook that I have. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this. Okay, so in Jupyter Notebooks, we have essentially two types of things we can create. We can have code and we can have Markdown. So code is code, and Markdown is all this text you see here. So this is all Markdown. So the way we type Markdown is it kind of looks like this format here. And we can do a lot of things with Markdown. It's actually like, I don't know if it's considered a language, but if you Google Markdown documentation, you can find like a whole list of all the different things you can do with Markdown. So for example, headings, you put these hashtags here. Bold is 2 asterisks, or you can just, in Google, you can go like this and it'll bold things for you. And then the effect of running a cell, like when you run a Markdown cell, is you get the output shown here. The Google option is great because it gives you a live preview of what you're typing. The native Jupyter Notebook option does not. So that's why I do like this. But Jupyter Notebook is also a good option. And it's kind of more like, I think it's typically more, I think it's typically favored, although I do like the Google option. Okay, so we'll just go through this workbook. So here we can see all the different formatting in Markdown. So like I mentioned, headings are created using this symbol, and all this will be available for you for reference after. You can always access this. Even if you can't get the notebook running, you can always access the GitHub. So you will have all this information after the workshop. And a lot of the things I went over before about Python and installing things are in the workbook. So you have those references there for you as well. Please use the workbook. We worked very hard on it. So yeah, it's a great resource, and all the workshops have their pages in there. So even the workshops you don't go to, if you're curious to see what they talked about, you can read their workbook page and you can access their GitHub. And you can still go through that on your own time if you want. Or if you feel like you maybe wanted to check out 2 at the same time, they're also all going to be recorded. So this will be on YouTube after, as will all the other workshops. So definitely go check them out after if you have more things you want to revisit something. That being said, so we have some headings, plain text, italics, bolds, and both. So just 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars. We can have unordered lists and ordered lists, and the way we can do that is unordered lists are with a star and ordered lists are with numbers like this. And you guys can see once I double clicked into this cell, it brought me to this like plain text view. So this is what it looks like when you're editing the text, and this is what it looks like when you go out of editing the text. We can do code snippets. So these are all considered code snippets here. So you can see that it looks like the plain text format. It doesn't look like the Markdown format. So you can do that with these, this character here, or you can indent when you type the code. We can do images. So the way we do an image, if I click on this, you can see, so you put the alt text, and then you put the image URL or path. Can you guys still hear me? Someone can just confirm that. I think my headphones might have died. Yeah, you guys can still hear me. Okay, wonderful. So you can do this by inserting alt text and then the image URL. So here my alt text is Python, because it's a picture of Python. And then here's the URL that I got it from. And then we can do the same thing with links. So you put what you want to be linked here, and then you put the actual URL that you want beside it. And that is all there for reference. So we can see we get the image inserted right here, and we get the link here. And these are pretty basic things, but there's definitely a lot of things you can do with Markdown, and you could probably play around with this forever. But that being said, the more important thing is code. So I'll get into the code. So to edit a code cell, we just have to click into it, and then to run it, you have this little button here. And if we go to the Jupyter Notebook, in the Jupyter Notebook, the way you run it is you can push, there's like a little run icon at the top, or you can push shift return or shift enter, and that will run the current cell that you're in. So this is a Python statement. It just is printing this text to the screen. So some Python basics is what we'll get into next. And if anyone has questions at any time, you can stop me or put them in the chat, and I will cover them. Okay, so I gave you guys some like resources here because I can't cover everything at once, obviously, but these are really good. These ones are like the official Python doc, so like an official tutorial. This one like links you to other tutorials, and this one is a course I found on Coursera. It's free, so if you feel like you want to do that, that might help. I do recommend doing some of your own research and just like playing around with Python, because it kind of gets, once you start your project, you'll have to know how to do like the basics in Python, and it's always okay to Google and Stack Overflow or whatever. But I do recommend having a baseline knowledge, which I'll try to give you now, and then you will be able to go from there. Okay, so in Python, how variables work is that every variable is an object, and all of our objects have types. So there's no type declarations in Python. It's done automatically. You can just say variable name equals and then whatever you want it to equal to. It's not like Java or C. If anyone's done that before, you have to say int or whatever you want before it. So the basic data types are int, so that is a whole number value, float, so the decimal value, and most of the things in Python end up being floats. Strings, so a string of characters, so we can have, this is supposed to have one quote, I think. Okay, well, we can have one quote strings and two quote strings. Booleans, so that's a true or false value, and none type, which is like an empty value, which is useful. It's useful when you want some data, but you want to know that there's no data, if that makes sense. Most of the things you'll end up doing will probably be with numbers like floats, and the data types really become important when you try to use some functions, which we'll get into in a bit, that may take one data type and you have another data type. So that's when they become important. In general, personally programming Python, I like to have an idea of what data types I'm working with, but it's not something that like is really essential to always be on top of, whether your numbers are like ints or floats. Like you can do the same thing with 3.0 as you can with 3. So there's no integer division in Python. It's just like, it just divides. Oh, you can't see it. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. Let me zoom in. Oh wait, no, that's not that one. Better. Sorry, I didn't realize it was small for you. It's because I'm on a bigger screen here. Okay, so this is what I just went over with, yeah, no problem. This is what I just went over with the variables and types. Yeah, so sorry guys, I did not realize you couldn't see this. So here's what I just went over with the variables and the types. So some examples using some code cells. So here I'm just setting num1 to 2 and num1 to 4, and then just printing them out just so we can see what that results. Addition, multiplication. So multiplication is done with a star. We can do exponentiation with 2 stars. So this is going to be 2 to the power 4. And we can reverse it, whatever, which now 4 to the power 2, which is also 16. So that wasn't really the best example, possibly. But the way this works is if I go over here and I change num2 to 3. So now we have 3 squared. But if I run this again, it's still going to say 16. And you might say, what's going on here? Well, and the reason that happened is because it's sequential. So if you want your variables to be updated in cells below, you should run the first one first and then run each one successively. Otherwise, you'll still have the old value saved into this cell here. So typically for large programs, it's sometimes a good idea to have like one or two like big cells instead of a lot of small ones, because you don't want anything to get lost, like moving around in your variables, and then that's just a pain. So we can do incrementing, which is seen in a lot of other languages. We can do this plus equals operator. So if num1 is 2, and we say num1 plus equals 3, now num1 is 5. And then if we do it again, now it's 8, and etc. So this is useful a lot of the time when you want to keep track of something, or you want to count something, like every time you're in a loop, or like in an if statement or something like that. It's pretty useful. Here we have some string type variables. So you can assign strings to variables just like we did with numbers. And we can also do string manipulation. So we can add two strings together. So if I said my string 3 equals my string plus 5 plus my string 2. So we can add strings, and then if I were to print this, we should just see the same result. Yeah. The other thing you can do is you can, in your print function, you can say, and then you can like pass a comma like that. So it'll print whatever you pass it just in a row. So it'll print hello, and then in this case, just the number 3. So that's pretty useful to know. And if we go down here and we say print my string, we can still see the original string isn't modified. So even though we've added it and we've printed it here and whatever, we still save our original value, which is pretty helpful. Printing can be helpful, especially in a GGroup notebook like this. There's no like official debugging like there is in a lot of IDE. So printing can be helpful to know what's going on with your code. It's a pretty useful function to use. With that being said, I'll do some basic function stuff. So for anyone who hasn't done Python before, this is how we declare a function in Python. So we say def, we use the def keyword, and then we name our function whatever we want, and then a colon, and then whatever you want inside of the function. And the advantage of using functions is it gives us a block of code that we can reuse with one line. So you might put 25, 30, 35 lines of code in this function, and then every time you just call the name of the function, you can reuse that code over and over, which is very useful. The other thing I should mention is in Python, we don't use curly brackets like a lot of other languages. We use colons and indents. So if I went here and I deleted this space right here, this would be wrong actually, which I know seems kind of weird, but see, this is expected an indented block. So whenever you have a colon, it tells the compiler that the next thing should be indented, and that's how we can see what's inside of the function. So if I came over here and I typed whatever, like hello equals 3, that's not inside of the function, not indented anymore. So that's how we see what's going on with that. Okay, so functions can also have parameters, which are like variables that we pass into them. So if I said here function with a number and I gave it num, it can print out this. I'm a function with the number num passed to me. And we call the function just by saying the name of it. So right here, if we see a basic function, so we see, here's definition of my function, prints hi, I'm inside a function, and then here I've called the function, and we see the results. Here's a bit more of a complicated one. We have def adder, and we take A, B, and C, and it's going to print hi, I'm an adder, and then it's going to print what we're adding, and then it's going to return them, return that value. So return is a keyword that we use when we want to get a value out of the function. So here I've said result equals adder. So that means that result is going to hold whatever the return value of adder is. And then here I'm just printing it the result. So when we run that, we say to hi, I'm an adder function, let's add these numbers here. And if I were to change this to like 9, you see it accommodates the result. So in this case, it's not that useful because we're just adding three numbers. We can just do that in our code. But for more complex things, it becomes very useful. So now I'll talk about some more like special functions. So over here, we saw how to define our own functions. Functions that have been created for us, like in different libraries, are very useful, and you will use a lot of them. I'll just give you an overview of some of the basic ones. So if you Google Python print function, you'll see something like this, and this is just to get you just to get used to like how documentation works. I know this looks confusing, but basically these are each parameters of the function. The first one we have object or objects, so that's anything we want to print. So in our cases before, strings, numbers, whatever. The next one is the separator. So by default, it's a space. So if you say over here, if I went over here and I said print high, comma 3, it'll print a space by default between high and 3. Now, if I were to add separator equals, and then let's say I wanted a comma, in theory, we should get high, comma 3. Oh, wait, something like that. It doesn't like this for some reason outside the period. So we have about a minute or two. Okay, there we go. Finally got it working. Okay, so now we can see it prints high, comma 3 instead. End is what it prints at the end of the thing. So the default is /n, which is the new line character. But if you wanted everything to end with a period, let's say we could say end equals period. So now it's going to print a period at the end of our string. File, you don't really have to worry so much about this one. The default is the console, which is what we want. And then flush, we don't really need to worry about that at all. So I'm just not going to talk about it. But you can always read more about these by just like Googling print Python, and you can do this for like any built-in default function. You can always kind of find this kind of documentation. Here I've just laid it out in more plain English for you, but there's a lot of resources that will always be able to tell you what a function does. In general, you pretty much always just use print and then whatever objects you want. You pretty much don't have to worry about these. And some other functions that will definitely be useful is this one, the string function, which we actually saw over here, which just converts another object to a string. This function, the absolute value function, so it returns the absolute value, and the length function, so returns the length of something like a string or an array, how many items are in it. And then similarly to string, we also have, which I didn't write here, we also have int, like int brackets, and that will convert like a floating point number like 4.0 into an integer like 4, and that is useful for also a lot of things. And with that, it is 12:05, so thank you all very much for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to just throw them in the chat, or you can message me on Slack. This is my email in the chat if you have any more questions or want to follow up. And I believe you guys just stay in this session and Sean will take over from me. Yes, there's Sean.
Hey, Nathan.
Okay, so I hope you guys all enjoyed and enjoy your next workshop. And thank you. What workspace is good to use? I like PyCharm. That's my favorite. It's an IDE. You can download it. You can download the professional version for free with your Queen's account. So if you go to PyCharm and then you find the educational version, you can put in your Queen's info. It's free. It's awesome. That's why I highly recommend. No problem. All right, bye guys.